G'day fellow flight simmers and random YouTubers. Well, today I'm going to illustrate some common mistakes pilots make on Vatsim. So, having controlled on Vatsim for a number of years, I've seen some weird and wonderful things. So today I'll be going over some of the most common mistakes that I consistently see on the network. So without further ado, let's get right into it. Number one, and that's wrong flight planning. Benjamin Franklin once said, "If you fail to plan, you plan to fail." Now, every good flight plan begins with a proper flight plan. If you don't have a proper flight plan, then that results in delays to your clearance, into ATC clearance, because you haven't checked your flight plan confers with the standard flight plans, i.e., for example, Melbourne to Sydney is the standard route details. There's no deviation from it. So if you plan the non-standard, then that delays your clearance or your ability to get a clearance from ATC. Now, the most common tool used these days by flight simmers is a tool called SimBrief. Now, there's no denying it's a very good tool. It's very powerful. It gives you fairly accurate fuel requirements. However, and there's always a however, be careful. Do not accept everything that SimBrief spits out as gospel. The other day, for example, I flew from Mackay to Brisbane, and SimBrief put me on low airway routes. In other words, flights that occur below flight level 180, even though I planned for flight level 390. And not only that, to add further insult to injury, it puts me on runway 01 right arrival into Brisbane, even though I was coming in from the north. So logically, you would think that I'd be on 01 left. So the takeaway is always check your flight plan. Don't just SimBrief spits it out. Okay, I'll take that. I have a video on flight planning. It's a couple of years old now. So you may want to check that out. So as I say, it's always best to prepare yourself and make sure your flight plan is a proper flight plan. Number two, not setting standard QNH above transition altitude. Okay, so what does that mean? Well, in the diagram, you can see, and this applies to Australia, that the transition altitude is 10,000 feet. The transition level is 11,000 feet. And between those levels is what they call the transition layer, and you can't fly between those two layers. Now, as I said, this applies to Australia. Beware, around the world you have different transition altitudes. For example, in America, I think it's at 18,000 feet. In parts of Europe, it's at 5,000, 6,000 feet. So, and the way you find that out is it normally tells you in the charts what the transition altitude is for wherever you're flying. So as you can see in the diagram, once you pass 10,000 feet, you set your QNH to 1013. And so once you pass 10,000, it's just standard QNH. Otherwise, you'll be flying at a level. You think you're at cruise level, but you're not, because your standard QNH hasn't been set. Now, how do you set your standard QNH? Now, from my experience, in this diagram illustrates the EFIS panel on the 737, and you can see here by the arrow there's a button called STD, and that is your standard button. So as soon as you pass 10,000 feet, you hit that button there and it sets the standard QNH at 1013. So that's how easy it is to set the standard. Now, I'm not sure with the Airbus how you do it, because I've never flown the Airbus, but that's for the 737. And just as a side note, and it just amazes me, when I was controlling the other day, I saw this gentleman, and he obviously hadn't hit the standard Q&H, and I said, just confirm your set standard Q&H. And he said, it was 1019er. Yes, and I thought to myself, yeah, that was when you left Melbourne, but what about now? You're above 10,000. And he said, okay, 1013, right. And I said, by the way, how long have you been flying? He said he'd been flying on Vatsim for 1 year. 1 year on Vatsim, and he hadn't known basic altimetry. So just be aware that flying on Vatsim, even though people think they're almost real world pilots, you're far from it. Number 3, and this happens so often, and that's descending too early. Now, if you have a look at these 2 diagrams here, you'll see the diagram on the left is, you can see FedEx 9127, and I gave him his star clearance, told him to descend to flight level 210. Now, within a minute, he started descending. And you see through the diagram on the right that he's basically reached his flight level 210. And by the way, the one on the left, if you have a look at the figure on the left, you see he's descending because between the numbers 328 and 210, you've got like a V, and that means he's descending. And the figure on the right, you can see 210, and you've got like the head of an arrow, and that means he's on level flight. So he's reached flight level 210. The 210 on the right signifies his assigned level, and 210 on the left means he's at that level. Okay, so he's on level of flight. And Vatsim, which is the ATC client, does a pretty good job in determining where an aircraft's top of descent is. And you can see from the figure on the right that the arrow basically is an approximation of where his top of descent is. And you can see that he's now at level flight way before he's even top of descent mark. So just be careful when you've been given your star clearance and the ATC star clearance says, when ready, descend to flight level 210, does not mean to descend now. It means you start your descent after you've passed flight level 210. In other words, set your MCP altitude on 210, and then as you get to your top of descent mark, it will descend. It doesn't mean to descend now, and that catches so many people out. So just be aware of that. Number 4, and this happens mainly through people that are new to Vatsim, not really understanding radio procedures, and that's other pilots not waiting for readbacks. In other words, most ATC instructions these days require a readback, and that whether it's reading back your clearance for takeoff or clearance of star or your departure clearance, most of the instructions require readback. So you as a pilot should be listening out for that and waiting for the other pilot to read back his instructions, and then waiting a second or two and then going ahead with your transmission. So just be aware that you've got to listen out and understand a bit of the ATC phraseology and just maybe pausing for a second. So the takeaway really is to listen carefully and just be courteous to other pilots. Otherwise, you just clog the system up if I have to sort of repeat and wait for other person to read back. So just be aware, it only takes 1 or 2 seconds. Don't be in a rush. So just, as I said, just be courteous to other pilots. Okay, that wraps it up, guys. If you like this video, hit that subscribe button so it helps me keep up with my alimony payments. So take care, guys, and catch you later. Cheers.